Today, I am hoping to talk with you all a little bit about how generative AI is being used by and in nonprofits, thinking about how these growing technologies can provide us practical tools given the important mission-driven work that you all do, thinking through the potential advantages of some of these tools, and of course, the important considerations and limitations they have as we think about how we might want to integrate them into our work. And so to start, I wanted to ask if you would be interested to have you share your interests and reflections on these possible tools with us. And so if you would go to this Poll Everywhere website, you can either scan the QR code or you can go to this URL, pe.app/Sarah Steimel. I'd love you to share either your biggest hope or fear or both about using AI in your nonprofit work. You can type in a word or two, anything that jumps out at you, if anyone has the ability to get to this website. Ooh, efficiencies, other thoughts, time saving, improved processes, advancement. But I'm starting to see some potential fears, right? Energy overuse, see time saving and analytics, see improved processes and create efficiencies getting bigger. Those are clearly things that are really resonating with people. Grant information and ethics, that's a really important consideration. Loss of jobs, that's certainly important. All right, it looks like the answers have stabilized potentially, but I think there are a number of really important patterns here in terms of potential hopes in efficiencies, in time saving, in providing us analytics and time saving, in responding to advancement, but also some really important considerations for us to be thinking about. And so I think it's important that we consider all of these when we think about how we might integrate these tools, or if we want to integrate these tools into our work. To make sure we're on the same page, I did want to include a quick definition. Generative AI is essentially a technology that creates new content from prompts you provide. As I'm sure you all know, generative AI is a sophisticated pattern matching engine that has learned from vast amount of text, images, and data, and it predicts and therefore provides content based on what it assumes would be relevant, based on pattern recognition. So it takes what we put in as a prompt and provides answers based on how it assumes information would be related based on that vast amount of data it's looked at. So it's not a sentient mind and it's not magic. Generative AI is an incredibly fast research assistant who has read millions of documents and can draft content based on patterns it recognizes, but it doesn't actually understand the information that it's providing in the way that a human does. And it doesn't understand your mission or content in the way that your team does. So it can handle certain tasks with remarkable speed and efficiency, but it's also limited in what it can do. And so it's important for us to remember that AI works best when guided by human expertise, judgment, and heart. It's really critical that when we're using these tools, we remember what it is doing and what it can do and what it can't do. That it can't actually understand in the same way that a human can what it's actually analyzing. In order to prepare this presentation, I wanted to give you a little bit of context as to where my information came from. In addition to reading published research about how nonprofits are leveraging these tools, so I drew on a large body of published publications and academic research journals. I also conducted in-depth interviews with 15 nonprofit leaders in a variety of organizations, with missions ranging from health to education to environmental conservation, as to how their organizations are starting to use generative AI, the opportunities and concerns they see, and their advice for leveraging these tools in ways that provide more benefit than harm to their organization. So throughout my presentation, you'll see quotations from nonprofit organizational leaders specific to how they're using their tools in their organizations. Because when I did those interviews, essentially the leaders told me the single most valuable thing they could do was to hear from other nonprofit organizational leaders how the tools are working for them, the advantages, the disadvantages, the policies they were using. And so I hope by sharing with you the voices of other nonprofit leaders, it can help you think about how these tools might be useful for you in your organizations. Ultimately, what I found across all of these interviews was something that I like to call a community kitchen analogy. The leader said again and again that AI is like a state-of-the-art calculator in a community kitchen. The calculator is fantastic for quickly calculating things like budgets, scaling recipes, or tracking inventory. It can absolutely save chefs immense time and reduce errors. However, the calculator cannot feel the ingredients or taste the seasoning or know the specific cultural preferences of the community being served. In other words, the chefs have to still provide the real human touch, the intent, the ethics, and the unique flavor. Because ultimately, any good meal relies on the genuine human care and connection, not just numerical efficiency. So for example, one of the leaders I interviewed said, I think the overarching principle is using AI as a tool or an assistant, rather than putting AI in the driver's seat. And so I think that's something important to keep in mind as we think about how these tools might serve us well. But the first set of things I wanted to talk about was how the leaders saw AI providing their organizations direct benefit. You know, where these tools can actually provide that sense of efficiency or scalability or a tool that can actually benefit the organization. So the first thing that the nonprofit leaders told me again and again is that AI is providing a great deal of value for structures and outlines, providing the ability to do faster work in grant writing, in proposals, in newsletters, and in all sorts of document creation. So for example, one leader said, generally I'm using AI to structure or create outlines. So oftentimes I'll use it to structure a grant proposal or to create an outline for a sponsorship proposal. So for example, one nonprofit leader said, I would put in a sample prompt like act like a grant writer for a youth literacy nonprofit serving rural communities, create a detailed but brief outline for a grant proposal focusing on a mobile library van program, include sections for statement of need, project description, key outcomes, budget justification, and evaluation methods. And they suggested that one powerful tool that can be used for this would be Google Gemini. And I assume many of you have played around with these tools, but I did want to show briefly what this might look like in case this is not something you have played with. So Google Gemini is one of the generative AI engines. It's Google's engine. It is similar to ChatGPT or to Claude or to other products that are out there. But Google Gemini in its free version is available with a Google account. So for example, if you have a Gmail account, you can access Google Gemini. And if you put a prompt like that in there, it will pretty quickly create an outline suggesting what ought to go in a grant proposal, you know, providing you the key areas of the grant and what might go under each area. One of the things that I struggle with when I write grants is the budget narrative, which I know is something that is difficult for many organizations, in part because it's easy to not fully anticipate every cost or to overlook categories of costs. And so one of the places I found generative AI to be very helpful is in suggesting cost categories when you're preparing a grant. And so I've followed up on grant outlines like these by saying things like, the budget estimates are the hardest part. Let's see. Budget template. The needed categories. And then it will provide a template with all of the types of information that you might need to cover in the grant, including categories that you might not have thought of. So for example, I might not necessarily think of vehicle fuel and maintenance as something that's really important in a grant, but it can provide brainstorming categories that might be helpful as you're thinking about what to include. And so in terms of quickly structuring, providing outlines, providing brainstorming, generative AI was something that the interviewees I spoke to said was saving them a lot of time and effort in their organizations. A second key use of these tools that organizations pointed to was in editing and reducing errors. So for example, they talked about AI as a second set of eyes. Before submitting an important proposal or sending a donor update, AI can serve as a quick quality control check. It certainly can't catch everything, but it's remarkably good at spotting typos, grammar errors, or awkward phrasing. So for example, one of my interviewees said, it allows our staff to be more efficient. It helps reduce errors by running a proposal through to check for grammar errors or spelling errors. And so one of the pro tips that I heard throughout my interviews was to paste in drafts of important documents, of newsletters, of proposals, and to ask your preferred tool to review this for grammar, spelling, and clarity, suggest improvements while maintaining a warm and professional tone. And they suggested, of course, that many generic tools, again, like Gemini, ChatGPT, or Claude, can provide free basic feedback. And then depending on your organization's interests, there are specialized tools like Grammarly that have subscription models, but are focused specifically on improving grammar, content, and form. But many of the people I talked to said they even do it for emails. So if they draft an overly long email, for example, to a client or to a donor, they might put it into one of these engines and say, you know, preserve the content of my email, but shorten it into bullet points in order to make it more readable or more user-friendly for the audience that they're sending it to. A third really powerful way that the nonprofits that I spoke to were using generative AI was to tame information overload. Certainly in organizations, we are presented with huge quantities of data, and we have to make sense of it in quick ways in order to make meaningful decisions. The good news is summarizing information is one thing that generative AI is actually quite powerful at, especially if we limit it to very particular information. So for example, you can paste in a long report and ask it to summarize it into 3 key bullet points. And even more powerfully, you can ask it to make the bullet points relevant to our particular program and tell it, you know, what your program's background or mission is. Another tool that's really helpful is that you can ask it to analyze open-ended data. I know most nonprofits collect survey responses or community feedback. And if you get, 80 or 90 responses, it can take time to wade through those and to make sense of those. And that can be really valuable. But if you need quick feedback, one of the things you can do is upload that data into AI and ask it to summarize key themes with example quotations, which can turn what is sometimes hours of data analysis into minutes. And of course, you can curate your own data. So one of the powerful things that you can do with AI is drop in your own last 3 to 4 annual reports, for example, and ask it to summarize your own trends or highlight your own organization's trajectory. For example, if you need background on your own organization for that initial section of a grant. A tool that's especially powerful for this is Notebook LM, which is another Google product. But the way Notebook LM is different is that you create a notebook and you upload your own data into it. And Notebook LM only looks at the data you upload. So while most of the generative AI products have built a large language model based on the internet, right? So when you use ChatGPT or you use Gemini, it's searching its entire repository of the internet. Notebook LM only looks at the data you choose to upload. And it does not then use that data in training. So it keeps it private. So for example, if I choose to upload a research question or a survey data, these were open-ended responses to a survey where students were answering what their instructors do to improve communication. You can see I got 164 student responses. I can ask what were the main themes students responded were helpful from their instructors. Give key themes with example quotations. And it will take it a minute because it's analyzing my data. But you'll see it comes up with key themes from the survey, right? These were survey responses. And then it quotes actual students. So these are student quotations from the survey, open-ended survey responses. And then the nice thing about Notebook LM is it cites its sources. So you can click on the number next to its answer, and it shows you where in the data it came from. So these are the open-ended survey responses, right? This is survey number 31, there's survey number 32. So I can actually look to see where it came from in the data. This is helpful because it reduces the chance of hallucination, of it making information up. It's a really fast way for it to code qualitative data for you. But you can actually upload, as I said, your own annual reports. You can upload any of your own documents and ask it questions about your documents. Ask it to summarize your documents, ask it to develop themes across your documents. And then you can ask it to make the output in different formats, audio or video. It'll make a podcast of your documents. It's actually quite powerful. And so a lot of the nonprofits I was speaking to were starting to use these kinds of tools. The final main way that nonprofits were using these tools was for creative brainstorming. They would tell me things like writer's block doesn't care that your social media post is due in an hour or that you have a donor newsletter due tomorrow. And so one of my interviewees said, I will use ChatGPT if I'm trying to write a social media caption and I'm just stumped. I'll go into ChatGPT and that usually will get my brain flowing. Of course, what they told me again and again is the key is to treat the AI output as a starting point for your own thinking, not the finished product. It's really good at generating ideas, but then it's important to select and refine the ones that resonate with your organization's authentic voice. We don't want to just copy and paste the ones that ChatGPT or similar AI engine comes up with, because they often sound a little bit robotic, and they certainly don't have the sort of nuance that your organization might prefer, right? It doesn't necessarily know the words or the unique flavor that might be important to you as an organization in Northern Utah, for example, or an organization working with a unique population, for example. But it is good at giving you some starting points. So for example, I hate writing titles for grant proposals. It's one of the things that I struggle the most with. And so I often use it when I'm finished writing a grant to help me generate proposal titles. So I'll say something like, given the attached grant proposal, suggest 3 to 4 possible titles that will catch the reader's attention and communicate the importance of the grants without being overly informal. And I'll use something like Gemini for that. And I'll attach grant proposal. And it'll take it a second, but then it will come up with a series of titles. And usually I can find some words that resonate with me. Like I happen to like this, From Passion to Prosperity. I like the idea of data-driven narratives. And so you can pick and choose some words that resonate with you and then use those to help you formulate your title or your social media post or whatever it is you're working on. So as I was talking to many of our nonprofit partners, again, they were really interested not only in how they were using it, but the use cases that were most helpful for others in their organizations. So I would love if you're willing for you in the chat to share, for those of you who have been using generative AI, what use cases have you seen be most helpful for you in your organizations? Sounds like Mackenzie's using it for writing goals, formatting logic models, generating titles for press releases, structuring of documents. Structure, grant research, notebook LM to analyze peer-reviewed scholarly articles, outlines. Yeah, getting the brain flowing. So it seems like folks are finding, yeah, a lot of these same patterns in different ways. Generating ideas, helping structure, helping brainstorm. I think it can be helpful to think about how different tools enable these efficiencies in slightly different ways. And so, as I mentioned, some of the large language models are more open, like Google Gemini, and I would argue that Claude and ChatGPT and DeepSeek are all similar. These are engines that create general intelligence and creation, right? They scrape the whole internet and they try to generate things based on that background. The advantage there is that it's really good at brainstorming and general inquiry, but you have to be very, very careful about what you share with it. We're going to talk about ethics here in a few minutes, because these large language models both gather things from the whole internet, but then use what gets pasted in there, which means we have to be very careful about what organizational information we share with them. And we have to be very, very careful about what information it gives us back, right? Because these large language models can sometimes make up information. So they're very, very good for brainstorming, for creativity, for structure, but we have to be aware of their limitations. Notebook LM, as I mentioned, is a more limited playing ground because it only analyzes the documents you upload. That has real advantages, right? You're only looking at your documents. So you can verify information. You can be sure of its accuracy, because if you're sure the documents you upload are accurate, then it's only pulling from that information. That means the security is higher. However, it's less good at brainstorming. It's less good at open structure, right? Because it's only limited to the information you provide it. And so thinking about which tool to pick for which situation is helpful in terms of thinking about what you want to provide. And so, yeah, thinking about why you would use one over the other comes down to what you're trying to accomplish in a particular situation. Oops, now I'm off my screen. And so, for example, you might start with Gemini to quickly generate an initial draft or to quickly generate an outline. And then move to Notebook LM to upload your own documents, to synthesize information that you're going to put into the outline, or pull together verified findings, put together your own surveys into it and pull together the data in order to put into a grant outline. Then return to something like Gemini to refine or to edit. You can jump back and forth. And so thinking about, what you're trying to accomplish and what the power of each of these engines is. And again, these aren't the only tools. I use Grammarly for editing. Grammarly is an AI focused on grammar, formatting, editing. Each of these tools offer slightly different advantages depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Oops. What we know in any of these tools is that it's really important to think about how we're prompting these engines. And so as we're thinking about prompting, the research shows the more specific we can be in our prompts, the better quality information we'll get back. And the acronym that's coming up pretty frequently in the research is CAR, I think because it's pretty easy to remember. And that is that in our prompts, we should be providing as often as possible context, assigning a role, and telling it the results that we want. So rather than saying, provide us with a grant outline, it's important to provide some sense of context, right? Who we are as an organization and what the grant is that we're trying to apply for example. I'm trying to write a newsletter from this organization for this type of audience, right? Am I trying to write my newsletter to our clients? Am I trying to write the newsletter to our donors? Am I trying to write the newsletter to both, which has a slightly different tone? So as much context as you can provide it. Second, we want to assign the AI a role or a persona, right? In what voice do we want this outline or the AI to be writing? It will dramatically improve the quality and relevance of the response if it knows from what perspective it should be responding. And then tell it as specifically as possible what kind of results you want, right? A bulleted list or a table or an outline or a 5-sentence paragraph. Notebook LM specifically is bad about giving pages and pages and pages of answer if you don't tell it specifically, right? I want 5 sentences or I want 2 paragraphs. And so the more specific you can be about what a successful output looks like, the more successful it will be in responding to you. And then, of course, you'll have to iterate, right? The first prompt is just the beginning. Most effective AI users treat their first prompt as a conversation starter. And then you refine, right? If it's overly informal, say, make the tone more formal, or shorten this 100 words, or expand on the second point with specific examples, or rewrite this for a donor audience. So, for example, one of my interviewees said, if you don't give it a good prompt, it's not going to give you a good result. One of the most useful skills that anybody can learn is just how to produce a good quality prompt. But I think that is, of course, a little easier said than done. So for those of you who are using generative AI or who have played around with it, what tips or tricks do you have to get the most out of your prompting? What do you find works well in getting AI to do what you want it to do? Drop that in the chat. What are you finding useful in terms of prompts? Camille, I like your observation about the difference between a summary and a detailed summary. And I could imagine both have advantages depending on what you're looking for in that context. And you're right, Kayla, you can absolutely give it an example of your writing and ask it to mimic your own tone. And Tyler's right. A number of these AI engines now have a talk method where you can talk to it and use that rather than typing out your prompts, and that can help it respond to you more organically. Mark points out he can use an AI prompt in one engine and paste it into another, so you can actually converse between multiple AI engines. Nancy points out you can ask it to take the perspective of a member of the audience, right? What would you want him or her to know? Excellent. So all of these point out the advantages and the importance of providing that additional context, right? Your own writing style, of your background, of what you're looking for, specifying the results, right? The difference between a summary and a detailed summary, of assigning it a perspective, and then engaging in that iterative conversation, whether you're using the voice tools, whether you're bouncing from one AI to the next, again, because they each have slightly different perspectives and slightly different value propositions, thinking through what it is you're wanting to find out, and then using the tools in a way that helps you do that more efficiently. It's of course important for us to talk about the pitfalls though. As you all even pointed out in your initial brainstorming, AI is not a perfect solution. And nonprofit leaders are rightfully cautious about adopting these tools. I think it's important for us to talk about at least 3 major concerns head on: cost, quality, and ethics. These aren't trivial obstacles. They require thoughtful consideration and clear policies. So when I was talking to nonprofit leaders about the realities of AI use, there were a number of potential red flags that came up in my conversations. The first one that came up fairly regularly was a financial barrier. So for example, one of the folks I talked to said, in all of the roles I've been in, we just can't afford advanced tools as a nonprofit. The reality is that many advanced AI tools require paid subscriptions, and they can be, $20 to more than $100 a month. However, there are free versions of many of these tools, ChatGPT, NotebookLM, Gemini, Claude, and others. And many of them do offer substantial functionality for organizations testing the waters. And so many organizations said that it was worth it to them to at least try the free versions and to begin to determine which ones might be worth investing in if they provide substantial efficiency and potential cost savings. The second issue that came up a lot was that inaccuracy is absolutely real. So for example, someone said, I've just found AI output is not 100% true. You have to really do your fact checking to make sure that what AI is producing is legitimate. And that is definitely correct. AI will very confidently state incorrect information. And in fact, AI will confidently make up false sources. So you can't use AI output without human verification, especially for data, statistics, or claims about your programs, even if it has a source attached to it. It will make up a source complete with like a URL or a DOI link and make it look like it has provided you verified information. So you always have to click on that link and make sure that the information at the source is the same as the information it's provided you. However, if you're aware of what AI can do and can't do, then again, you can use multiple tools to help mitigate some of that, right? AI is very good at providing outlines. It's very good at brainstorming. And then you can use different tools, for example, like NotebookLM, to analyze your own information and provide the information that you know to be verified, and summarize it using AI tools and input that back into your grants or into your newsletters or into your reports. And so it's important to know what the affordances are of these different technologies, and then to verify things that are generated with generative AI to make sure that you're getting correct information. It's important not to ever just turn in something that's generated from a general generic AI tool as if it's accurate. And then, of course, the authenticity problem is very real. So, for example, a number of folks said, if you want to sound super fake and be super fake, then use ChatGPT for professional correspondence. Several people said, I can tell within 2 seconds if something is written with AI and somebody didn't edit it. Unedited AI writing has a distinctive generic quality that undermines trust. Donors and community can tell. And many people said that this was especially true for images and video. And in fact, most of the folks I interviewed for this project said that they would not generate images or video on behalf of their nonprofit organizations and share them on social media or in newsletters as if they were real. In other words, if they generated an image with AI, they would very clearly label it as an AI-generated image, and they would not share it as if it were real. I'm not sure if any of you have seen, for example, this last month, Coca-Cola produced their holiday ad The Coca-Cola company does a Christmas ad every year with the polar bears. Typically, it's very popular, but this year Coca-Cola produced it with AI rather than hiring animators. And they've gotten quite a bit of backlash online. People are very upset about the ad, in part because of some of the concerns you all have pointed out, right? The fact that they didn't hire animators, so job loss, for example, but also just because the ad is pretty terrible. The animals don't move like real animals. They look like robots. It's kind of glitchy. At this point, AI video, AI images just don't look as authentic, as realistic as those produced, certainly for real, right? Like an actual camera taken image, or those produced by human animators. And so at this point, it's very important to be thoughtful about using AI produced images or video, especially if you're not disclosing it. And then in this case, the Coca-Cola company did disclose. But if you're not disclosing and people notice the inconsistencies, the weird editing, the fact that, sometimes these images have 6 fingers, they're likely to push back. And so it's important to make sure that if you're using content that's generated, that then it is edited or otherwise proofread by a human, so that there's still that sort of sense of human connection in this content. And so what I was hearing when I did these interviews was essentially that the line is that we still need to have a core human connection at the heart of our work, and that it's important to ask, what does our audience need? And so, for example, one person said, I consider what does my audience's need at this time? Is it just information or is it emotion? Do they need some sort of emotional support, acknowledgement, or connection? So while AI might help draft a program update email, I was told that it should never write a condolence message to a grieving donor, or a personal thank you note to a volunteer, or a response to a client sharing trauma. In other words, while it might be able to sort of factually summarize key information, or provide an outline, or provide a template, that when we're still connecting with humans as humans, it's important for a human to be part of that loop. And what I heard was that it was important for our organizations to put that on record. So for example, one of my interviewees said, in our policy, we really make the point that AI is a tool, that you are the user of the tool and you are responsible for what the AI produces before it goes out to the public. So if AI generated content contains an error, misrepresents your program, or offends the community, your organization obviously bears a responsibility and is likely to get the backlash, not the AI tool. So every piece of AI generated content has to be thoroughly reviewed, fact-checked, edited, and approved by a human who takes ownership of the product. In addition, data privacy is really important. As we mentioned, these large language models have trained on the data available on the internet, but also most of the available tools have somewhere in the fine print that when you enter your information or enter a prompt into their system, they can then use that prompt or use whatever you upload as part of their training system. So it's really important not to ever put personally identifiable information or client data or donor financial details or confidential organizational information into a public AI tool. Anything you paste could potentially be used to train the model or be accessed by others. So for example, one interviewee said, as far as privacy, it's against our policy for any personal identifiable information to be input into any kind of AI. So if your organization doesn't have clear guidelines about what can and can't be entered into AI systems, it's a good idea to create those sooner rather than later, and then to have regular training with your team on those boundaries. But I would love to hear what additional concerns have you all been balancing as you consider AI adoption in your organizations? What are the key issues you all think are going to matter as we think about how to integrate these tools? Sounds like Catherine says privacy is a big one, being balanced with the time saved plus the creative possibilities. Brian points out AI use replacing employee responsibilities. It's an interesting one because it definitely is a double-edged sword. It didn't come up as frequently in my interviews, but some people noted that, of course, the upside of efficiency, of course, is that perhaps fewer employees could do more or do more faster, which means that organizations have greater capacity and perhaps could do more with fewer people, which is both good for capacity building. It allows nonprofits with limited budgets to serve more people, but of course, then has potentially negative implications for employment, right? Perhaps fewer people will be hired as these tools become more powerful. I think those are real concerns that folks don't necessarily have sorted out yet. Mark points out that perhaps people are dismissing AI out of fear without understanding its true affordances and limitations. And I think that's true. Certainly here at the university, right, people have many feelings about AI, positive and negative. Certainly we don't have answers universally about how it's affecting student learning, about how people should incorporate it into their classrooms. We know that it's important. Our students absolutely need these skills. The research says that students will use these AI tools when they're in their workplaces, but how to best integrate those and continue to support student learning is something that's ongoing. And so it's important to continue to think through these implications as we move forward. Certainly, we want to continue to support the human element in our nonprofit work, because that's the core of what we do, both for our clients and our communities, but also for the employees that are critical to the work we do. And so thinking through how to protect everyone involved is important. One of the ways to do that is to build an AI policy. I know many organizations are starting to do this. Weber State is in the initial stages of doing this. And I would encourage you, if you haven't yet as an organization, to really think through doing this sooner rather than later. The research shows that a simple AI policy should have at least 4 important elements. First, it should have a clear purpose statement. To what extent is AI being used in your organization and why? I would argue that it's important to affirm that AI is a tool that should amplify and not replace your human-driven mission work. It's an efficiency tool, but that humans should retain strategic control and final decision-making. After an introduction and a purpose statement, your AI policy should contain rules about privacy and confidentiality, whatever those look like in your organization. I would argue in general, it's best practice to say no personally identifiable information, client data, donor financial information, or confidential organizational details into AI tools without explicit authorization. There should be a section on quality and accountability, some set of rules around how output should be reviewed, fact-checked, edited, and approved by a human who takes responsibility for the accuracy and appropriateness of the information before it gets published or distributed. And then some sort of value statements about transparency and voice. Final content should reflect our organization's voice, values, and missions. AI serves as a tool. Humans should ensure genuine connection and cultural competence. And then there's a transparency piece, right? Does your organization want to disclose when you use it and in what forms? And are there places where that disclosure is more important than others? So perhaps you don't feel it's necessary to disclose if you just use it as an outlining tool or as a grammar editing tool. But as I mentioned, if you're putting up images on social media that are entirely fabricated, right? If the images are generated by AI, it may be important to disclose that those are not actual photographs of an event, for example. So thinking through, when do we need to be honest or transparent about the AI use for our community might be important to a policy. And so I wonder, for those of you who have or are considering AI policies, first I'd be interested, does your organization already have an AI policy? And if you do, or if you're considering one, what do you think are the most critical elements? If we can start with, do you have an AI policy yet? And what do you think needs to be there? So Catherine points out the donor privacy is really critical, and grant writing is for editing only. That's a good insight. That it can't just be a list of don't do this statements, but a balance between rules and then training how to use it properly and effectively. And I would argue not just the training, which is of course incredibly important, but also do this statements. And by that I mean, part of the reason I would argue that we should start with that affirmation start or the vision part of the AI policy is that it's helpful to know what we do want it to be for, right? Why could this be useful or helpful, or what do we envision this being meaningful for, before we get into some don't do's or limitations. And so thinking about how can AI be helpful or transformative, and then, some guardrails, and then training is a way to integrate this all effectively. I see Brian says quality and accuracy of information is really a priority. Evidence-based information to the public is a priority. And agreed, those are really important considerations. And I think will become even more important in the age of AI. As I tell my students all the time, AI really allows us to do the work in a way that helps us communicate potentially more quickly, respond more rapidly to our communities, and that can be really powerful. My students are communication students, but that means that getting people accurate information is even more important. In a world of misinformation, in a world where our clients or communities might be chat GPTing and getting incorrect information back, being able to get people accurate information quickly is even more essential. And so being able to leverage these tools smartly to get our clients or to get our communities information quickly, that's well formatted, that's edited, but that's true, gives us even more power, but even more responsibility. So I think that's so critical, Brian. And so I know it can feel like a lot. I know none of you have a lack of things on your to-do list, but even a very simple AI policy for now that just affirms these values of privacy, of accuracy, of human fact-checking might be worth it. Or a lunch conversation where you all just agree to this for now as these tools are growing might be well worth your time, because as these tools continue to grow, I think it's important for us to have a set of standards or a set of guardrails that we're willing to work within as we continue to explore the possibilities. And so as we continue to use these tools, I think it's important to sort of start small and stay intentional. Remember that AI is an assistant, not the director. So it's important to keep humans firmly in the driver's seat for strategy, relationship, and anything requiring empathy or cultural competence. that it's important to master the art of prompting, to use the CAR acronym to give context, to assign a persona, to limit the response, to make sure that we have clarity and specificity in our instructions, and then to practice, iterate, and refine. Always fact check, and then add human voice. And then protect sensitive data like your mission depends on it, because it does. Right? Establish clear policies and train team on data privacy boundaries. And so as we're thinking forward, I think it's helpful to think about one specific action step you'll take this week to build on this webinar. Is there one small specific task you'd like to try with a free AI tool? Would you like to branch out and try one specific AI tool you haven't tried before? Would you like to introduce a conversation about an AI policy for your organization? If there's one action takeaway you can take from this, then you can move your organization's work on this forward in a way that might be productive or meaningful. And so I'd love to hear if there is one action step or one takeaway you would like to use this week. So I see Mackenzie say that she would like to try Notebook LM. The interest in exploring team discounts with things like OpenAI. And I agree, certainly these paid subscription models can be costly. There are team discounts, and some of the organizations have corporate discounts and potentially group discounts that can be useful. Nancy points out refining prompts, which for me has been probably the most transformative. I've definitely gotten better at it as I've worked on it. And so I would encourage you to play around with that if that's something that you have time to play with. So that is my general overview of AI use in nonprofit organizations. I wanted to provide a high-level overview because I know folks are in different places in their use and adoption. Some folks are new to using these tools, and some of you are using them quite extensively. If you have individual questions, if there's a tool that you want feedback on or want to try, for example, if you want individual help using Notebook LM or Gemini or a similar tool, I'm happy to work with you individually or to chat with the group about additional ideas or concerns. So I am more than happy to stay and work with folks, but I wanted to provide that overview and to encourage thinking about policy as you're moving forward.